Have you ever felt like you were being watched by something that saw right through your soul? The astropathic choir on the fortress world of Ophelius 7 began screaming at exactly the same moment. 15 psychic humans, their eyes burned out and replaced with arcane sensors, all convulsed in their restrained thrones simultaneously. Their mouths opened, and instead of words, they produced a sound that made everyone in the chamber cover their ears in pain. It wasn't a scream. It was something worse. A psychic shriek that carried a message of wrongness, of something fundamentally evil entering the galaxy. Inquisitor Lord Katarina Greyfax was in her private chambers when the alarms began. She had served the Holy Inquisition of the Ordo Hereticus for over 2 centuries, hunting witches, heretics, and traitors across 100 worlds. She had faced chaos sorcerers, rogue psychers, and demon-possessed governors. Nothing surprised her anymore. Nothing scared her. Until today. The message from the astropaths was simple but terrifying. An entity of immense psychic power had appeared in the segmentum obscurus. Its signature was unlike anything in Imperial records. Not Eldar, not Orc, not Tyrannid, not even Chaos, though it carried the taint of dark magic. It was something entirely new, something that didn't belong in this galaxy, and it was growing stronger. What would you do if you detected a threat unlike anything you'd ever encountered before? Greyfax stood before the tactical display in the Ophelius 7 Command Center, studying the data with cold, analytical eyes. She was a tall woman with severe features, her hair pulled back tightly, and her face marked with scars from decades of war. She wore the symbol of the Inquisition proudly on her chest, a stylized eye surrounded by a human skull. Her armor was black and silver, practical rather than ornate, designed for function over decoration. "Show me the exact location," she commanded. A tech priest, more machine than human, manipulated controls with mechadendrites, mechanical tentacles emerging from his back. The holographic display shifted, showing a star map of the segmentum obscurus. A red marker appeared on a mining world called Virgo Tertius, a planet so insignificant it barely registered in Imperial records. The psychic signature originated here, Inquisitor Lord, the tech priest said in a voice that was half human, half mechanical buzz. Initial scans indicate a single entity, but the power reading is equivalent to a minor warp rift. Whatever it is, it shouldn't exist. Greyfax's jaw tightened. In the Imperium, things that shouldn't exist were exactly the things that needed to be destroyed immediately. The Emperor's domain had no room for uncertainty, no tolerance for the unknown. There was only one response to a psychic threat of this magnitude: total extermination. "Assemble a kill team," Greyfax ordered. "I want the best we have." Within hours, she had gathered forces that would make most enemies in the galaxy flee in terror. From the Officio Assassinorum came an Everzer assassin, a chemically enhanced killing machine that could slaughter entire armies in minutes. These assassins were kept in stasis between missions because they were too dangerous to be conscious. Their combat drugs made them unstoppably violent. Have you ever met someone so dangerous they had to be kept frozen when not actively killing? From the Grey Knights, the secret chapter of Space Marines who specialized in fighting demons, came a squad of Terminators. These warriors wore the heaviest armor in the Imperium and carried weapons blessed by the Emperor himself. Each one was a psychic warrior who had spent decades training to resist chaos corruption. If the target turned out to be demonic, the Grey Knights would banish it back to the warp. And from the Death Watch, the elite alien hunters, came a kill team of specialists. These were Space Marines from different chapters, united in their mission to destroy Xeno's threats. They had fought Tyrannids, Necrons, Orcs, and Eldar. Whatever this new entity was, they would find a way to kill it. Greyfax's personal retinue included a Culexus assassin, perhaps the most terrifying weapon in the Imperium's arsenal. Culexus assassins were blanks, humans born without souls, creating a void in the warp that canceled out psychic powers. Being near one felt like having your soul slowly sucked away. Even allies avoided them. But against a psychic threat, there was no better weapon. The target is on Virago Tertius. Greyfax briefed her assembled forces aboard her personal warship, the Righteous Flame. We know nothing about it except that it radiates psychic power strong enough to be detected across sectors. That makes it dangerous. That makes it heretical. That makes it our mission to erase from existence. The Grey Knights nodded solemnly. The Death Watch checked their weapons. The Everzer assassin thrashed in its containment pod, sensing battle approaching. The Culexis assassin simply stood motionless, its presence making everyone in the room deeply uncomfortable. Standard purge protocol, Greyfax continued. We make planetfall, locate the target, and eliminate it with extreme prejudice. No warnings, no negotiations, no hesitation. The Emperor protects, but we are his sword. Questions? No one had questions. This was what the Inquisition did. Find threats. Destroy threats. Protect humanity from things it didn't even know existed. Would you have the strength to kill something without even knowing what it was first? The Righteous Flame entered the warp, traveling through the nightmare dimension toward Virago Tertius. The journey would take days, but Greyfax used the time to study every scrap of information about the target world. It was a mining colony with a population of about 50,000, mostly indentured workers extracting rare minerals for the Imperium's endless war machine. Nothing remarkable, nothing that would attract special attention. So why had something impossibly powerful chosen to appear there? Greyfax didn't believe in coincidences. In her experience, every detail mattered. Every pattern revealed truth. This entity had chosen Virago Tertius for a reason. Maybe the planet had some strategic value she hadn't identified yet. Maybe there was a hidden artifact or ancient technology buried beneath the mines. Or maybe, and this thought troubled her most, the entity had chosen an insignificant world specifically because no one would notice until it was too late. When the Righteous Flame exited the warp near Virago Tertius, the first thing Greyfax noticed was the silence. Mining worlds were usually loud with astropathic traffic, ships requesting docking permission, foremen reporting quotas, workers sending messages to other Imperial worlds. But Virago Tertius was quiet. Too quiet. Scan the planet, Greyfax ordered. I want to know what we're walking into. The ship's auger arrays, advanced sensors that could detect everything from life signs to radiation, swept across Virago Tertius. The results made even Greyfax pause. The population was still there, all 50,000 people, going about their normal routines. The mines were operating. The factories were producing. Everything looked completely normal. But the psychic signature was stronger now, emanating from somewhere beneath the planet's main settlement. It's underground, the tech priest reported, approximately 3 kilometers beneath the primary hab block. The signature is stable, not fluctuating like a warp rift would. Whatever it is, it's waiting. Waiting. That word sent a chill through Greyfax's spine. Demons didn't wait. Chaos didn't wait. They attacked, corrupted, destroyed. But something intelligent, something with a plan, that waited. Can you imagine discovering that your enemy knew you were coming and prepared for you? Prepare for immediate deployment, Greyfax commanded. Full tactical gear. Assume hostile environment. And someone wake up the Everzer. I want it ready to kill the moment we locate the target. The kill team assembled in the deployment bay. Grey Knights checked their psi cannons, weapons that fired blessed bolts designed to kill demons. Deathwatch Marines loaded specialized ammunition. They had rounds for every type of enemy imaginable. The Culexis assassin calibrated its Animus Speculum, a helmet weapon that could project the psychic void directly into an enemy's mind, killing them with pure emptiness. And the Everzer assassin was released from stasis, its eyes immediately going wild with chemical rage, held back only by the control words Greyfax spoke in High Gothic. They dropped from orbit in armored pods, hitting Virago Tertius's surface like meteorites. The impact shook the ground, sending miners scrambling away in confusion and fear. Greyfax emerged from her pod, storm bolter in one hand, power sword in the other, ready for immediate combat. But there was no combat, no enemies, Just confused, frightened workers staring at the Inquisition forces like they descended from the heavens, which, technically, they had. Inquisitorial business, Greyfax announced through her armor's Vox speakers. Return to your hablocks. Anyone who interferes will be executed for obstruction. The workers fled. Smart decision. Greyfax's team descended into the mines, following the psychic signature. The tunnels were dark, lit only by flickering lumen globes. Water dripped from the ceiling. The air smelled of rock dust and machine oil. Deeper they went, following scanners that tracked the psychic presence. And then they found it. Not a demon, not an alien, not a chaos cultist. A single humanoid figure, sitting calmly on a stone outcropping in an abandoned mining chamber. It was skeletal, clearly undead, wearing robes that seemed to be made of shadows. One of its hands was missing flesh, just bone. One of its eyes glowed with unnatural red light. The entity looked up at the heavily armed kill team and smiled. Inquisitor Greyfax, it said in a voice like grinding bones. I've been expecting you. My name is Vecna, and I'm very interested in learning how your organization works. What would you say if your target knew your name before you even introduced yourself? Greyfax didn't hesitate. Kill it. Have you ever wondered if the information you trust most might be a carefully crafted lie? The kill team opened fire immediately. Bolter rounds, each one a small rocket designed to explode inside the target, screamed through the mining chamber. The Grey Knights unleashed psychic lightning from their force weapons. The Death Watch fired specialized ammunition designed to kill everything from Orc war bosses to Eldar farcers. The Everzer assassin launched forward with inhuman speed, its neuro-gauntlet crackling with lethal energy. Vecna didn't move. The attacks passed right through him. Every bullet, every psychic blast, every strike from the Everzer's claws hit nothing but air. The skeletal figure sitting on the stone didn't even flicker. It was an illusion, a perfect, flawless illusion that had fooled even the Inquisition's most advanced sensors. Impressive response time. Vecna's voice echoed through the chamber, coming from everywhere and nowhere. Immediate lethal force. No hesitation, no questions. The Inquisition is every bit as efficient as the record suggested. Greyfax's eyes narrowed behind her helmet. Spread out. Find a real target. Use Auspex scanners and psychic detection. It's still in this chamber. I can feel it. The Grey Knights extended their psychic senses, trying to penetrate the illusion and locate Vecna's true position. The Culexis assassin activated its anti-psychic field, creating a zone where magic and psychic powers should be suppressed. The Death Watch switched to thermal imaging, hoping to catch body heat signatures. But Vecna was already gone. Or perhaps he had never been there physically at all. What would you do if your enemy could be anywhere, watching you, while you were powerless to find him? What Greyfax didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Vecna wasn't even on Borrego Tertius anymore. He had appeared there just long enough to trigger the psychic detection systems, knowing exactly what response it would provoke. The entire encounter had been a test, a way to observe the Inquisition's protocols, their weapons, their tactics, and most importantly, their personnel. Vecna's all-seeing, I had studied every member of the kill team during those brief moments. He knew their strengths, their weaknesses, their fears. But more valuable than any of that was the information he had gathered about Inquisitor Lord Greyfax herself. She was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly dedicated to her mission. She trusted her instincts above all else. She had survived 2 centuries by being paranoid, by questioning everything, by never letting sentiment cloud her judgment. She was, in many ways, the perfect Inquisitor, which made her the perfect target. Several days passed. The kill team scoured Borrego Tertius from top to bottom, finding nothing. The psychic signature had vanished completely. Greyfax interrogated the entire mining colony, using methods that range from simple questioning to psychic probe to outright torture. No one knew anything about the skeletal figure. No one had seen anything unusual before the Inquisition arrived. It was as if Vecna had appeared solely to announce his presence, then disappeared like smoke. Frustrated but not defeated, Greyfax returned to the righteous flame. She filed her report with the Inquisitorial Conclave, marking Vecna as a Class Alpha psychic threat requiring immediate termination. Then she did what any good hunter does. She waited for the prey to make another mistake. But Vecna wasn't going to make mistakes. He was going to make Greyfax question everything she thought she knew. Can you imagine trusting someone completely, only to have that trust shattered by a single whisper? 3 weeks after the Virago Tertius incident, a junior inquisitor named Corvus was investigating a suspected genestealer cult on a hive world called Molastus Prime. Corvus was young by inquisitorial standards, only 40 years old, but he had proven himself capable and loyal. He reported directly to Greyfax and considered her his mentor. The investigation was routine. Evidence of alien infection, standard purge protocols, nothing unusual. Corvus led a team of stormtroopers through the hive's underbelly, tracking the cult to their hidden nest. They fought through waves of hybrid creatures, half human and half alien, finally reaching the cult's inner sanctum. And there, waiting among the alien filth, stood Vecna. Corvus froze. He had read Greyfax's report about the skeletal entity with the glowing eye. Every inquisitor in the sector had been briefed about this new threat, but seeing it in person was different. The aura of wrongness, the psychic pressure, the sense that reality itself bent around this creature. It was overwhelming. Inquisitor Corvus, Vecna said calmly, ignoring the stormtroopers who were aiming their weapons at him. Lower your weapons. I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to give you a gift. Corvus didn't lower his weapon. The only gift you'll receive is the Emperor's judgment. Heretic. Stormtroopers open. Magister Theron Blackwood, Vecna interrupted. The name hung in the air like a curse. Corvus felt his blood go cold. Magister Theron Blackwood was Inquisitor Lord Greyfax's most trusted advisor. He had served with her for over 50 years, managing her intelligence network, coordinating her operations, advising her on the most critical decisions. If Greyfax trusted anyone in the entire Imperium, it was Blackwood. What about Magister Blackwood? Corvus demanded, his finger tightening on his bolt pistol's trigger. Would you want to know a terrible secret about someone you trusted, even if that knowledge might destroy everything? Vecna smiled his skeletal smile. 3 months ago, on the shrine world of Dimamar, Magister Blackwood attended a secret meeting. The other attendee was a representative of the changeling of Tsench. They discussed methods to infiltrate the Inquisition's highest levels. Blackwood has been compromised Inquisitor. He serves the ruinous powers now, feeding Greyfax false information to manipulate her actions. Lies, Corvus shouted. Chaos, filth. You're trying to turn us against each other. Am I? Vecna asked softly. Then why did Blackwood authorize the deployment to Virago Tertius, even though it was clearly a trap? Why did he personally select every member of that kill team, ensuring they would all be exposed to my psychic signature? Why has he been slowly isolating Greyfax from other Inquisitors, making her dependent solely on his counsel? Corvus wanted to pull the trigger. He wanted to shoot this creature and end this conversation. But doubt, terrible doubt, had already begun to take root in his mind. What if Vecna was telling the truth? What if Blackwood really was corrupted? You have no proof, Corvus said, though his voice lacked conviction. Vecna's eye glowed brighter. Check the astropathic log from Dimamar. Look for encrypted messages sent to coordinates in the Screaming Vortex. Search Blackwood's personal chambers on Ophelia 7. You'll find a small brass icon hidden beneath the floorboards of his meditation room. An icon bearing the symbol of Tsench. Why are you telling me this? Corvus demanded. What do you gain? I gain nothing, Vecna replied. I'm simply interested in watching what happens when the truth comes to light. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other appointments. Vecna vanished before Corvus could fire. One moment he was there, the next he was gone, leaving no trace of his presence except for the terrible seed of doubt he had planted. Corvus stood in the empty sanctum, his mind racing. He should report this immediately to Greyfax. He should tell her everything Vecna had said. But what if doing so made things worse? What if Vecna was lying, and this was all a trick to make the Inquisition paranoid? But what if Vecna was telling the truth? Have you ever had information that could destroy someone's life and had to decide whether to use it? Corvus made his decision. He would investigate quietly, on his own, without telling anyone. If Vecna was lying, no harm done. He would simply destroy the false evidence and report the encounter. But if Vecna was telling the truth, the investigation took 2 weeks. Corvus used his inquisitorial authority to access records that should have been sealed. He found the astropathic logs from Dimimar, and buried deep in encrypted files, he found messages sent to coordinates in the Screaming Vortex, a region of space controlled by chaos. The encryption was sophisticated, but not sophisticated enough to stop an Inquisitor with the right clearance codes. The messages were fragmentary, heavily coded, but their meaning was clear enough. Someone on Ophelia 7 was feeding information to Chaos forces, and the messages originated from Blackwood's personal communication array. Then Corvus did something that violated every protocol he had sworn to uphold. He broke into Blackwood's private chambers on Ophelia 7. Using a Calidus assassin's polymorphine to disguise himself as a maintenance servitor, he searched the room while Blackwood was away on assignment. And beneath the floorboards, exactly where Vecna had said it would be, Corvus found a small brass icon. It was old, covered in dust, but unmistakable. 8-pointed star, the symbol of chaos, the mark of Tsench, the changer of ways, god of manipulation and lies. Corvus felt like the floor was falling away beneath him. It was real. All of it was real. Blackwood was a traitor, and Greyfax had no idea. What Corvus didn't know, what he couldn't know, was that everything he had found was false. Vecna had spent weeks preparing this moment. He had used his necromantic powers to interrogate dead astropaths, learning their encryption codes. He had forged the messages using magic that perfectly mimicked astropathic communication. He had planted the brass icon using teleportation magic, placing it in Blackwood's chamber without ever physically entering Ophelia 7. Every piece of evidence was a lie, but it was a perfect lie, one that would withstand even inquisitorial scrutiny. Can you tell the difference between truth and a perfectly crafted deception? Corvus reported his findings to Greyfax. He expected her to be shocked, devastated, perhaps even grateful. Instead, her face became a mask of cold fury. "You investigated my most trusted advisor," she said slowly. "Based on the word of a heretic, we are actively hunting. Inquisitor Lord, the evidence. Could be fabricated," Greyfax interrupted. "Could be planted. Could be exactly what this Vecna creature wants us to find." But even as she said the words, doubt flickered in her eyes. She had seen the evidence. The messages. The icon. They looked real. They felt real. "What do you want me to do?" Corvus asked quietly. Greyfax was silent for a long moment. Finally, she said, "Nothing. Say nothing to anyone. I will investigate this myself." Over the next week, Greyfax quietly examined Blackwood's activities. She found more evidence. Small things, details that individually meant nothing, but together painted a damning picture. A meeting that Blackwood claimed never happened but appeared in surveillance logs. A recommendation for a mission that, in retrospect, seemed designed to fail. A decoded message fragment that matched chaos communication protocols. It was all fake. Every bit of it had been carefully planted by Vecna. But Greyfax didn't know that. She only knew that the evidence pointed to one inescapable conclusion. Her most trusted advisor, her friend of 50 years, was a traitor to the Emperor. The Inquisition does not hesitate. The Inquisition does not forgive. The Inquisition purges. 3 days later, Greyfax summoned Blackwood to her private chambers. He entered smiling, carrying a data slate with reports from the latest operations. He trusted her completely. Why wouldn't he? They had fought together for half a century. He never saw the bolt pistol she had hidden behind her back. The shot took him in the chest, the explosive bolt detonating inside his ribcage. Blackwood died instantly, a look of complete shock frozen on his face. He didn't understand. He couldn't understand. He was loyal. He had always been loyal. But Greyfax would never know that. She stood over his body, her face expressionless, and whispered, "The Emperor protects." Then she turned away and began writing her report. Magister Theron Blackwood, eliminated for suspected chaos corruption. Evidence conclusive. No trial necessary. The first domino had fallen. The Inquisition had begun to purge itself. And somewhere in the shadows between dimensions, Vecna watched and smiled. Have you ever made a decision you thought was right, only to realize too late that it was exactly what your enemy wanted? The execution of Magister Theron Blackwood sent shockwaves through the inquisitorial conclave on Ophelia 7. Word spread quickly, not through official channels, but through whispers in corridors, hushed conversations in sanctums, and encrypted messages between worried inquisitors. Greyfax had killed her own advisor without trial, without consultation, without even informing the other inquisitor lords. That was unusual, disturbing even. The Inquisition operated on absolute authority. Each inquisitor was judge, jury, and executioner within their area of responsibility. They answered to no one except the God Emperor himself. This independence was necessary. The enemies of humanity were too numerous, too varied, too dangerous to waste time with bureaucracy and oversight. But that same independence meant that when an inquisitor went rogue, when corruption took root in the very organization meant to root out corruption, the damage could be catastrophic. And now, other inquisitors were asking themselves a terrible question. If Blackwood was corrupted, who else might be compromised? And if Greyfax was willing to execute her own advisor without proof, could she herself be trusted? Vecna had predicted this reaction perfectly. He had studied the Inquisition psychology, understood how they thought, how they operated. They were trained to see threats everywhere, trained to trust no one completely, trained to act decisively against even the slightest hint of corruption. That paranoia was their greatest strength, and Vecna was turning it into their greatest weakness. What would you do if you couldn't trust the people sworn to protect you? 3 days after Blackwood's execution, Inquisitor Marcus Valdane received a data package through an encrypted astropathic channel. Valdane was a veteran of the Ordo Xenos, having spent 60 years hunting alien threats across the Eastern Fringe. He was cautious, methodical, and deeply suspicious of anything that seemed too convenient. The data package was definitely too convenient. It contained detailed records of communications between Blackwood and 5 other Inquisitors, including 2 Inquisitor Lords. The messages discussed strategic realignments, alternative interpretations of Imperial doctrine, and necessary compromises for the greater good. Individually, the phrases were meaningless. Together, they sounded like the language of traitors trying to communicate in code. Valdane studied the data for hours, running it through authentication protocols, checking encryption signatures, analyzing linguistic patterns. Everything checked out. The messages appeared genuine. They had been sent through official inquisitorial channels. The encryption keys matched the personal signatures of the inquisitors allegedly involved. But Valdane had survived 60 years by being suspicious of everything. Where did this data come from? He demanded of his communication officer. The officer, a tech priest with more augmetic implants than organic parts, consulted his records. Origin point unknown, Inquisitor. The astropathic signature was scrambled through multiple relay stations. Could have come from anywhere in the sector, or from anyone, Valdane muttered, including the entity Greyfax encountered on Virago Tertius. Should I delete the data? Inquisitor? Valdane hesitated. That would be the smart choice, the safe choice. Destroy potentially false information and move on. But what if it wasn't false? What if there really was a conspiracy within the Inquisition? What if Blackwood's execution was just the beginning of something much larger? Can you ignore a warning that might save lives, even if that warning comes from an enemy? Valdane made copies of the data and sent them to 3 Inquisitors he trusted, or at least trusted as much as any Inquisitor could trust another. He included his own analysis, suspicious origin, possible fabrication. Investigate with extreme caution. That should have been the end of it. A warning, a suggestion to be careful, nothing more. But Vecna had prepared for this possibility too. He had been watching Valdane through magical scrying, observing his actions through the eye of Vecna. The moment Valdane sent those messages, Vecna activated the second phase of his plan. He had already placed evidence in the personal quarters of the 5 Inquisitors named in the data package. Small things, easily overlooked items that would seem innocent individually, but damning when viewed together. A book with certain passages highlighted in a specific order that, when combined, formed a heretical prayer. A crystal that, when analyzed, contained trace elements found only in the Eye of Terror, the region of space where chaos was strongest. A personal journal with entries that, if interpreted the right way, could suggest sympathy for forbidden ideologies. None of it was real. All of it was manufactured by Vecna using magic, forgery, and manipulation. But it would hold up under investigation, at least initially. When Valdane's trusted contacts received his message, they did exactly what he expected. They began quiet investigations. They searched records. They interviewed colleagues. They looked for patterns. And they found exactly what Vecna wanted them to find. Have you ever searched for something so hard that you found it, even when it wasn't really there? Inquisitor Helena Saris was the first to act. She had received Valdane's data and investigated Inquisitor Lord Covenant, one of the 5 names on the list. What she found horrified her. Encrypted communications with coordinates in the Screaming Vortex, unexplained absences during critical operations, and a crystal in his personal chapel that radiated a faint but unmistakable warp signature. Saris was a Puritan, someone who believed in absolute adherence to Imperial doctrine with no exceptions, no compromises, no tolerance for even the smallest deviation. When she found what she believed was proof of Covenant's corruption, she didn't hesitate. She assembled a kill team and stormed Covenant's chambers on the Fortress Monastery of Titan, home of the Grey Knights. The confrontation was brief and brutal. Covenant, shocked and confused by the accusations, tried to defend himself. Saris interpreted his defense as resistance. She executed him on the spot, right there in his own chambers, in front of a dozen witnesses. The news spread like wildfire through the inquisitorial network. An Inquisitor Lord had been killed by another Inquisitor, not in combat against heretics, not fighting demons, killed by one of their own, accused of chaos corruption. The Conclave on Ophelia 7 immediately demanded an investigation. Saris presented her evidence, the communications, the crystal, the journal entries. Other Inquisitors examined the evidence and found it convincing, disturbing, real. What they didn't find was proof that it had been planted. Greyfax, still dealing with the aftermath of executing Blackwood, received the news with a growing sense of dread. She recognized the pattern. Suspicious evidence appearing at convenient times. Trusted individuals suddenly revealed as traitors. It felt orchestrated, manipulated. But manipulated by whom? Vecna was the obvious answer. But how could one entity plant evidence in multiple secure locations across different worlds? How could he forge communications that passed authentication protocols designed to be unbreakable? How could he make the Inquisition turn on itself so efficiently? Unless Vecna wasn't working alone. Unless there really was a conspiracy and Vecna was just exposing it. That thought terrified Greyfax more than any demon she had ever faced. Because if there was a real conspiracy, if the Inquisition truly was infiltrated by chaos, then everything she had dedicated her life to protecting was already compromised. Can you fight an enemy that might not exist, or ignore a threat that might be real? The investigations multiplied. Every Inquisitor who had worked with Blackwood or Covenant came under scrutiny. Their communications were analyzed. Their actions were questioned. Their quarters were searched. And Vecna, watching from the shadows, planted more evidence. A forged message here. A suspicious artifact there. A witness with a manipulated memory. Each piece of evidence carefully calibrated to seem plausible, to fit the pattern, to confirm the growing paranoia. Inquisitor Lord Kairos, who had served the Ordo Malleus for over a century fighting demons, was accused of harboring a demon in his personal weapon. The accusation was based on testimony from a possessed cultist. a cultist whose memories Vecna had carefully altered using necromantic magic. Kairos was executed by his own battle brothers before he could mount a defense. Inquisitor Thaddeus Kane, a hero of the Gothic War, was found with a book of forbidden lore in his library. The book was actually a legitimate research text that every Inquisitor was allowed to possess, but someone, Vecna, had added pages containing heretical prayers. Kane was given the choice: execution or exile. He chose exile, fleeing into the darkness beyond Imperial space, his reputation destroyed. Inquisitor Miriam Cross discovered that her astropath had been sending encrypted messages to unknown recipients. The astropath, under extreme interrogation, confessed to serving chaos. What Cross didn't know was that the astropath had been dead for 3 days. Vecna had reanimated the corpse with necromancy, programmed it with false memories, and sent it back to confess. By the time anyone realized the truth, Cross had already executed 3 of her own staff members based on the dead astropath's testimony. The purges continued. Inquisitors investigating Inquisitors. Executions without trials. Entire conclaves dissolving in accusations and counter-accusations. Have you ever watched an organization destroy itself from the inside, unable to stop the collapse? Within 2 months, 15 Inquisitors were dead. 20 more were under investigation. 5 had fled Imperial space entirely, preferring exile to execution. The Inquisitorial Conclave on Ophelia 7, once a symbol of unity and strength, had become a battlefield where former allies watched each other with suspicion and fear. And the real enemies of the Imperium, Chaos cultists, Genestealer cults, Orc war bands, Eldar pirates, noticed. They saw the Inquisition tearing itself apart and moved to exploit the weakness. Entire sectors that had been kept safe through inquisitorial vigilance suddenly found themselves vulnerable. On the hive world of Secundus, a Genestealer cult that had been under surveillance for years suddenly launched an uprising. The Inquisitor who had been monitoring them was dead, executed by a colleague who thought he was corrupted. No one took over the operation. The cult grew unchecked, infecting 3 entire hive spires before anyone noticed. On the shrine world of Benediction, a chaos cult performed a ritual that opened a warp rift. Normally, the local Inquisitor would have detected the psychic buildup and intervened. But that Inquisitor was busy investigating his own staff, convinced that one of them was a traitor. By the time he realized what was happening, demons were pouring through the rift. It took 3 regiments of Imperial Guard and a full company of Space Marines to close it. 10 million people died. On the agri-world of Harvest Prime, an Orc invasion fleet arrived in system. The Ordo Xenos Inquisitor responsible for that sector should have coordinated the defense, but he was under house arrest, accused of consorting with aliens based on evidence that Vecna had carefully fabricated. The Orcs slaughtered the Planetary Defense Force and burned half the world's crop production before reinforcements arrived. The sector would face famine for the next decade. The Imperium was bleeding, and the Inquisition, the organization meant to stop such threats, was too busy fighting itself to notice. Greyfax watched it all with growing horror. She had started this. Her execution of Blackwood had been the first domino. Everything that followed, every death, every accusation, every catastrophe, could be traced back to her decision to trust Vecna's planted evidence. But she still didn't know it was planted. She still believed Blackwood had been a traitor. She still thought she had done the right thing. That was Vecna's greatest victory, making his enemies destroy themselves while believing they were doing their duty. What would you do if you realized you'd been the weapon someone else used to destroy everything you loved? In a private chamber on Ophelia 7, Greyfax knelt before a shrine to the God Emperor. She had not slept in 3 days. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from exhaustion and stress. For the first time in 2 centuries of service, she didn't know what to do. "Emperor, guide me," she whispered. "Show me the path. Help me see the truth." But the Emperor, trapped on his golden throne, fighting his own endless war, did not answer. He never did. Greyfax was alone, just like every other Inquisitor, just like Vecna had planned. Have you ever been so certain you were doing the right thing that you never stopped to question if you were being manipulated? The High Lords of Terra received the reports from Ophelia 7 with growing alarm. The Inquisition, humanity's shield against corruption and heresy, was collapsing from within. Worlds were falling to enemies that should have been detected and eliminated months ago. The organization that had protected the Imperium for 10,000 years was failing. Something had to be done. And when the Imperium needed problems solved quickly and permanently, there was only one organization to call: the Officio Assassinorum. The Grand Master of Assassins, a figure so secretive that even his name was classified, reviewed the situation with cold efficiency. The Inquisition was compromised, either by actual traitors or by mass paranoia that made them see traitors everywhere. Either way, the result was the same. The organization was non-functional. The solution was obvious: eliminate the corrupted elements. Restore order through targeted assassination. The Officio Assassinorum would do what the Inquisition apparently could not: identify the real traitors and kill them before more damage was done. Orders went out to temples across the galaxy. Calidus assassins, masters of disguise and infiltration, were deployed to inquisitorial conclaves. Helixis assassins, walking voids in the warp, were sent to eliminate suspected psyker traitors. Everzer assassins, unstoppable killing machines, were unleashed on facilities believed to be corrupted beyond redemption. And Vindicare assassins, the most precise snipers in the galaxy, were given target profiles of inquisitors who had been marked for execution. It should have worked. The Officio Assassinorum had never failed when given clear targets and proper intelligence. But their intelligence was corrupted, because Vecna had made sure of that. Can you imagine assassins so skilled they never miss, being sent to kill the wrong people? Calidus assassin operative Theta 79 received her mission parameters while still in transit to Ophelia 7. Her target, Inquisitor Wilhelm Corvin, suspected of consorting with Xenos and using forbidden alien technology. The evidence file was extensive: communications with Eldar corsairs, possession of Wraithbone artifacts, testimony from witnesses who claimed to have seen him performing alien rituals. Theta 79 studied the file with professional detachment. She had killed hundreds of targets during her career, from planetary governors to cult leaders to rogue space marines. One more Inquisitor would make no difference to her. The Imperium had judged him guilty. She would execute the sentence. What she didn't know was that every piece of evidence in her file had been fabricated by Vecna. The communications were forged using magic that perfectly mimicked astropathic transmission. The Wraithbone artifacts had been planted in Corvin's chambers using teleportation spells. The witnesses had their memories altered by Vecna's necromantic powers. They genuinely believed they had seen what they reported, even though it had never happened. Corvin was completely innocent. He was, in fact, one of the few Inquisitors actively trying to stop the paranoia and investigate the source of the false accusations, which was exactly why Vecna had marked him for death. Theta 79 used polymorphine, a shape-shifting drug unique to Calidus assassins, to assume the appearance of Corvin's personal aide. She walked through Ophelia VII's security checkpoints without challenge. She looked perfect, sounded perfect, even had the correct biometric signatures. The polymorphine was that good. She found Corvin in his private study, reviewing case files and trying to identify patterns in the accusations. He looked up when his aide entered, smiling tiredly. "Theta, I need you to pull the communications log for." The neural shredder concealed in the assassin's palm fired, releasing a blast of exotic particles that liquefied Corvin's brain in microseconds. He died before his body hit the floor, never knowing why, never understanding that his death served no purpose except to advance Vecna's plans. Theta 79 left the body where it fell and walked out of the fortress, already shifting her appearance to blend with the crowds. Mission accomplished. Target eliminated. Just another day's work for the Officio Assassinorum. But Corvin's death had consequences. He had been working on a theory that all the accusations were connected, that there was a single source manipulating the evidence. His files contained the beginnings of a pattern analysis that might have exposed Vecna's involvement. Now those files would never be completed. The investigation died with the investigator. Have you ever wondered how many times the truth has been killed before it could be revealed? Across the sector, other assassins carried out their missions with equal efficiency and equally tragic results. Culexus Assassin Operative Sigma 4 was sent to eliminate Inquisitor Arya Sethes, a powerful psyker accused of using her gifts to hide her corruption. Sethes was actually using her psychic powers to try to detect the real source of the manipulations. Her talents made her dangerous to Vecna's plans. Sigma 4 found her in meditation. Her mind extended into the warp, searching for answers. The Culexus Assassin activated his animus speculum, projecting a beam of anti-psychic energy directly into Sethes' consciousness. For a psyker, it was the most horrifying death imaginable. Feeling your connection to the warp, the thing that defined your existence, being ripped away and replaced with absolute emptiness. Sethes screamed for 3 seconds before her brain shut down completely. In those 3 seconds, she had been on the verge of understanding something important. A pattern in the psychic residue of the false evidence. A signature that didn't match any known chaos corruption. She died before she could share that revelation. Everzur Assassin Operative Omega 2-2 was deployed to Purification Station Gamma, a remote facility where Inquisitors interrogated high-value prisoners. Intelligence suggested the entire station had been compromised by its Cinch cult. The intelligence was wrong. It was based on interrogation transcripts that Vecna had altered using magic, making innocent responses look like coded messages to chaos. But the Everzur didn't know that. Couldn't know that. Everzur assassins were programmed killing machines, pumped full of combat drugs that made them incapable of doubt or hesitation. Once released, they killed everything in their path until the mission was complete or they died trying. Omega 2-2 was released into Purification Station Gamma like a plague. The Inquisitor's station there never had a chance. The Everzur moved through the corridors at superhuman speed, its neurogauntlets tearing through armor and flesh, its executioner pistol firing explosive rounds that turned bodies into red mist. 17 Inquisitors died, 43 support staff, 20 prisoners who might have had valuable intelligence, all killed in less than 8 minutes. When Imperial forces finally arrived to secure the station, they found Omega 2-2 standing in the central chamber, surrounded by corpses, its body riddled with wounds that would have killed a normal human 10 times over. The Everzur was still alive, kept conscious by the drugs in its system, waiting for confirmation that the mission was complete. They put it back in stasis and cataloged the dead. The official report called it a successful purge of a corrupted facility. No one questioned the intelligence that had sent the Everzur there. No one investigated whether the accusations had been true. After all, the Inquisition had confirmed the corruption, and the Inquisition was never wrong, except when they were. And when they were wrong, people died. Would you follow orders to kill, even if you suspected those orders might be based on lies? Vindicare Assassin Operative Kappa 17 had the most difficult assignment. His target was Inquisitor Lord Veritas, one of the oldest and most respected members of the Ordo Hereticus. Veritas had served for 3 centuries, personally responsible for purging over 50 chaos cults and saving billions of lives. But the evidence against him was damning. Communications with known heretics, possession of forbidden texts, witness testimony claiming he had performed dark rituals. The High Lords themselves had signed the execution order. Kappa 17 took position on a building 2 kilometers from Veritas's location, his Exodus rifle assembled and calibrated. The weapon was a masterpiece of Imperial technology, capable of killing targets from distances that should have been impossible. Combined with the Vindicare's enhanced reflexes and supernatural accuracy, it was the most precise killing tool in the galaxy. Through his scope, Kappa 17 watched Veritas walk through a crowded plaza. The old Inquisitor moved slowly, using a power staff as a walking stick. He looked tired, ancient, harmless, but appearances meant nothing. The evidence said he was guilty, The orders said to kill him. Kappa 17's finger tightened on the trigger. In 3 seconds, the turbo-penetrator round would pierce Veritas' skull, killing him instantly. Mission complete. In those 3 seconds, Kappa 17 did something Vindicare assassins almost never did. He hesitated. Something felt wrong. The evidence was too perfect. The witnesses too consistent. Everything lined up too neatly, like someone had carefully crafted a narrative rather than uncovering truth. But orders were orders. Doubt was weakness. The Imperium demanded absolute obedience. He pulled the trigger. The round crossed 2 kilometers in less than a second, punching through Veritas' skull and detonating inside his brain. The old Inquisitor collapsed mid-step, dead before he knew he was in danger. Kappa 17 disassembled his rifle and disappeared into the crowds, already moving toward his extraction point. Mission accomplished. What he didn't know, what he would never know, was that Veritas had been days away from exposing the truth. The old Inquisitor had lived through enough conspiracies and manipulations to recognize the patterns. He had compiled a list of all the accusations, all the evidence, all the executions, and he had noticed something crucial. Every piece of evidence contained trace elements of necromantic magic, a type of power that didn't exist in the Warhammer 40k universe naturally. Someone from outside was manipulating the Inquisition. Someone with abilities that shouldn't exist. And Veritas had been about to present his findings to the High Lords of Terra. Now he was dead. His research was lost. And Vecna's secret remained safe. Can you measure the cost of killing the one person who knew the truth? The assassination campaign continued for weeks. Dozens of Inquisitors died, each one targeted based on evidence that seemed credible but was actually fabricated. The Officio Assassinorum believed they were helping restore order to the Inquisition. In reality, they were doing Vecna's work for him, eliminating anyone who might uncover his manipulations. But even the Assassinorum began to notice problems. Missions that should have been straightforward became complicated. Targets who were supposed to be corrupted fought back with genuine faith and conviction. Evidence that had seemed solid started showing inconsistencies when examined closely. The Grand Master of Assassins received a report from Theta 79, the Calidus who had killed Corvin. She had returned to debrief and mentioned something unusual. Target appeared genuinely confused by accusations. No signs of corruption in living quarters. Personal effects suggested deep faith in the Emperor. Recommend review of intelligence sources. Similar reports came from other operatives. Targets who didn't act like traitors. Evidence that felt manufactured. Witnesses whose testimonies seemed rehearsed rather than genuine. The Grand Master began his own investigation, pulling files on every assassination mission related to the inquisitorial purges. And he saw what Veritas had seen, a pattern. Every mission was based on intelligence that had passed through specific channels, been verified by specific sources, been authenticated using specific protocols. And every one of those channels, sources, and protocols had one thing in common. They could be manipulated by someone with sufficient skill in forgery, magic, and psychological manipulation. Someone like Vecna. Have you ever realized, too late, that you've been the weapon someone else used to commit murder? The Grand Master immediately ordered a halt to all Inquisition-related assassination missions. He sent encrypted messages to the High Lords of Terra, warning them that the Officio Assassinorum might have been compromised, not by traitors within their ranks, but by false intelligence fed to them by an outside source. But the damage was done. 38 Inquisitors were dead, killed by assassins who thought they were serving the Emperor. Countless investigations had been derailed. The Inquisition's ability to protect the Imperium was crippled, and Vecna, watching from the shadows, was satisfied. He had turned humanity's most elite killers into his unwitting servants. He had made the Imperium kill its own defenders. The Inquisition wasn't just fighting itself anymore. It was being systematically dismantled by forces that thought they were helping. And the worst part? Even knowing they had been manipulated, even understanding that Vecna was behind the false intelligence, the Imperium couldn't undo what had been done. The dead Inquisitors couldn't be brought back. The trust that had been shattered couldn't be easily repaired. Vecna had proven something terrifying. With the right manipulations, you could make the Imperium destroy itself from within, using its own weapons, its own protocols, its own absolute certainty that it was always right. Somewhere in the webway, Vecna smiled his skeletal smile. Phase 3 of his plan was ready to begin. It was time to bring all the paranoid, suspicious, terrified Inquisitors together in one place, and watch them tear each other apart. Have you ever been in a room full of people who all think everyone else might be their enemy? The summons went out across the sector, encrypted with the highest level inquisitorial codes. Every surviving Inquisitor was ordered to attend an emergency conclave at Fortress Station Vigilance, a massive space station orbiting a dead moon in neutral space. The message was clear. The crisis had reached critical levels. The Inquisition needed to gather, investigate itself, and root out the corruption that was tearing it apart. Over 50 Inquisitors responded to the summons. They came from across the segmentum, veterans with centuries of service, young operatives barely past their trials, specialists from all 3 major ordos. They brought their retinues, their advisors, their personal guards. The station, normally home to maybe 200 people, suddenly held over 1,000. And every single one of them was suspicious of everyone else. Inquisitor Lord Greyfax arrived with a heavy heart. She knew this conclave was necessary, but she also knew it was dangerous. Bringing together so many paranoid, heavily armed, deeply suspicious individuals in one location was like storing explosives next to an open flame. One spark could cause a catastrophe. But what choice did they have? The Inquisition was bleeding. Worlds were falling. The organization that had protected humanity for millennia was on the verge of collapse. If they didn't fix this now, there might not be an Inquisition left to save. What Greyfax didn't know, what none of them knew, was that the Conclave was exactly what Vecna wanted. He had been working toward this moment for months, carefully manipulating events to ensure that all his enemies would gather in one place, armed and afraid. Can you imagine walking into a meeting where everyone is carrying weapons and looking for traitors? Fortress Station Vigilance was designed to be impregnable. Its walls were 3 meters of reinforced adamantium. Its void shields could withstand bombardment from an entire battle fleet. Its defense systems included automated gun turrets, psychic dampeners, and scan arrays that could detect everything from hidden weapons to chaos corruption. No enemy could infiltrate it. No attack could breach it. But Vecna didn't need to infiltrate or attack. He just needed to plant seeds of doubt and watch them grow. The Conclave gathered in the station's main chamber, a vast circular room with tiered seating arranged like an ancient amphitheater. In the center stood a raised platform where speakers could address the assembly. Above everything hung the symbol of the Inquisition, a massive golden eye surrounded by a skull, gleaming in the chamber's harsh lighting. High Inquisitor Lord Torquemada Codiaz, the eldest and most respected member present, called the Conclave to order. He was ancient, his body more bionics than flesh after centuries of war, but his mind was still sharp. He had survived the Gothic War, the Third War for Armageddon, and countless other conflicts. If anyone could guide the Inquisition through this crisis, it was him. Brothers and sisters, Codiaz began, his voice amplified through Vox speakers. We stand at the edge of disaster. In the past 3 months, we have lost 38 of our order. Not to demons, not to Xenos, not to heretics. We have lost them to each other. The chamber was silent. Everyone knew the truth of his words. We are here to determine what has happened. Who has been corrupted? Who can be trusted? We will investigate every death, every accusation, every piece of evidence. And we will not leave this station until we have the truth. It was a noble goal, a necessary goal, but it was also impossible, because Vecna had made sure that the truth would lead in circles, pointing fingers at everyone and exonerating no one. Would you trust an investigation conducted by people who might themselves be the criminals? The first day of the Conclave was spent reviewing evidence. Each Inquisitor who had been executed was discussed. The accusations against them were presented. The evidence was examined. And in almost every case, The evidence seemed credible, but troubling questions emerged. How had so much evidence been gathered so quickly? How had investigations that normally took months been completed in days? How had secure facilities been searched without proper authorization? Inquisitor Valdane stood and addressed the assembly. I reviewed the evidence against Inquisitor Lord Covenant before his execution. At the time, it seemed conclusive, but I've since had my tech priests analyze the data signatures. The communications attributed to Covenant, they were sent from his personal array, yes, but the encryption keys were accessed remotely from an unknown source, at times when Covenant was verifiably elsewhere. Murmurs spread through the chamber. "Are you suggesting the evidence was fabricated?" demanded Inquisitor Saris, the woman who had executed Covenant. "I'm suggesting it's possible," Valdane replied carefully. "Possible?" Saris's voice rose with anger. "I saw the evidence myself. I verified it personally. Are you accusing me of incompetence? Or something worse?" And there it was, the spark that Vecna had been waiting for. Accusation met with counter-accusation. Suspicion breeding more suspicion. Have you ever watched a conversation that started peacefully turn into an argument in seconds? Greyfax tried to intervene. "We're not here to accuse each other. We're here to find the truth. If evidence was fabricated, we need to determine who." "Who indeed?" interrupted Inquisitor Lord Karamazov, a massive figure in powered armor who was known for his absolute intolerance of heresy. "Evidence doesn't fabricate itself. If communications were forged, someone did the forging. If encryption keys were stolen, someone stole them. We have a traitor among us, and I will not rest until they are found and burned." Multiple inquisitors stood, shouting to be heard. Some agreed with Karamazov. There must be a traitor. Others sided with Valdane. The evidence itself was suspect. Still others remained silent, watching and evaluating, trying to determine who could be trusted. The chamber descended into chaos. Not physical violence. Not yet, but the kind of controlled chaos where every statement was analyzed for hidden meaning, every gesture examined for signs of deception. Vecna, observing through magical scrying from safe distance, was delighted. They were doing his work for him. The second day began with Inquisitor Helena Saris demanding a formal investigation into Valdane's loyalty. He cast doubt on verified evidence. He questions the judgment of multiple inquisitors. He suggests that we cannot trust our own methods. This is exactly the kind of rhetoric a traitor would use to protect themselves. Valdane rose to defend himself. "I question evidence because that is what we are trained to do. Critical thinking is not heresy. If we cannot examine our own conclusions, we are no better than fanatics. Fanatics keep the Imperium safe." Sarah shot back. "Doubt gets people killed. You speak like someone who has forgotten what we stand for." High Inquisitor Cody Yaz tried to restore order, but the damage was done. Two respected Inquisitors, both loyal servants of the Emperor, were now publicly questioning each other's integrity. Others took sides, forming factions based on who they trusted more. Can you imagine a group of people trained to find enemies accidentally making enemies of each other? By the third day, the conclave had fractured into three major factions. The Puritans, led by Karamazov and Saris, believed that the evidence against the executed inquisitors was genuine. They argued that the Inquisition had been infiltrated by chaos, and that only ruthless purging could save it. Anyone who questioned the executions was suspect. The Reformers, led by Valdane and supported by Greyfax, believed that the evidence had been manipulated by an outside force. They wanted a thorough investigation before any more executions took place. But their calls for caution were interpreted by the Puritans as signs of corruption. The isolationists, who belonged to neither faction, simply wanted to survive. They stayed quiet, avoided taking positions, and hoped that whatever was happening would resolve itself without them getting caught in the crossfire. And Vecna? He made sure the factions kept growing further apart. On the third night, while inquisitors slept in their assigned quarters, Vecna used his magic to plant more evidence. He placed a forbidden text in Valdane's personal effects. He created a falsified communication log showing Greyfax receiving messages from an unknown source in the Screaming Vortex. He left a blood-stained ritual knife in the quarters of an isolationist inquisitor who had been trying to stay neutral. The evidence was discovered the next morning during routine security sweeps. And suddenly, the three leaders of the factions calling for careful investigation were themselves under suspicion. Have you ever tried to prove your innocence when the evidence makes you look guilty? Valdane was arrested before he even left his quarters. The forbidden text, a copy of the Liber Malefactorum, banned for containing detailed descriptions of chaos rituals, was found hidden in a locked chest. Valdane insisted he had never seen it before, that someone must have planted it. But that's what a guilty person would say. Greyfax's arrest was more dramatic. When the communications log was presented to the Conclave, she immediately recognized it as a forgery. This is manufactured. I never sent these messages. Someone is manipulating us. But Inquisitor Karamazov looked at her with cold eyes. Magister Blackwood said the same thing before you executed him. The words hit Greyfax like a physical blow. Because he was right. Blackwood had been innocent, and she had killed him based on evidence just like this. And now she understood, truly understood, what Vecna had done. He had made her the architect of her own downfall. Don't you see? Greyfax shouted to the assembled Inquisitors. This is what the enemy wants. We're destroying ourselves. Every piece of evidence, every accusation, it's all been manipulated to make us fight each other. Or, Karamazov replied coldly, that's exactly what a traitor would say when finally exposed. The vote was held immediately. Should Greyfax and Valdane be executed for suspected corruption? The Puritans voted yes. The isolationists abstained. The reformers, now leaderless and afraid, were split. In the end, High Inquisitor Kodiaz made the final decision, and he chose mercy, not execution, but imprisonment pending further investigation. Greyfax and Valdane were locked in the station's holding cells, their weapons confiscated, their authority suspended. Would you thank someone for imprisoning you instead of killing you? But the Conclave's problems were far from over. With Greyfax and Valdane removed from leadership, the reformers collapsed. Most joined the isolationists, hoping that staying neutral would keep them safe. A few joined the Puritans, convinced that ruthless action was the only way forward. And then the real violence began. On the fifth day, an isolationist inquisitor named Demetrius was found dead in his quarters, killed by a single precise bolt round to the head. The investigation revealed that the shot had come from a Vindicare-class Exodus rifle, a weapon used only by the Officio Assassinorum. But no assassin had been authorized to board the station. Someone had smuggled in an assassination weapon, or someone had brought one themselves. Paranoia reached new heights. Inquisitors began traveling with armed guards at all times. Private meetings were conducted in shielded rooms with multiple witnesses. Trust evaporated completely. The sixth day brought another death. Inquisitor Matthias, a Puritan who had been particularly vocal about executing suspected traitors, was killed by poison slipped into his recaf. The poison was identified as a neurotoxin favored by the Calidus Temple of Assassins. But again, no Calidus had been authorized to be present. Inquisitor Saris demanded immediate action. Someone is killing us. We need to identify the murderer before we all die. But how could they identify the killer when everyone was a suspect? When anyone could be hiding weapons? When the evidence itself couldn't be trusted? Have you ever felt like you were trapped with a killer but couldn't identify who it was? High Inquisitor Kodiaz tried one last time to restore order. He called for a complete lockdown of the station. No one in or out until the killer was found. All Inquisitors were to submit to psychic interrogation by trusted librarians from the Grey Knights. But even that plan fell apart when one of the Grey Knight librarians reported that he detected traces of chaos corruption in several Inquisitors, including Inquisitors who had been beyond suspicion moments before. Were the detections real? Or had Vecna found a way to make innocent people register as corrupted? No one knew. And in the Inquisition, not knowing was the same as being guilty. The seventh day of the Conclave was when everything finally broke. Inquisitor Karamazov, convinced that the Grey Knights had been compromised, refused to submit to interrogation. When other Inquisitors tried to force the issue, he activated his powered armor's weapon systems. The resulting firefight killed 7 people in 30 seconds. And once the first shots were fired, there was no going back. Inquisitors drew weapons. Retinues activated combat protocols. Personal guards opened fire on anyone who moved suspiciously. The chamber descended into absolute chaos. A battle royale where former allies killed each other because they didn't know who to trust anymore. High Inquisitor Cody Yaz died trying to stop the violence, killed by a stray bolt round meant for someone else. Inquisitor Saris was cut down by a power sword wielded by someone she had considered a friend. Inquisitor Karamazov's armor was breached by concentrated fire from multiple directions, and he died still shouting accusations at everyone around him. By the time the violence finally stopped, 15 more Inquisitors were dead. 20 others were seriously wounded. The survivors stood among the carnage, weapons still raised, staring at each other with horror and disbelief. They had done it. They had destroyed themselves, exactly as Vecna had planned. Can you measure the victory of an enemy who never had to raise a weapon? In her cell below the main chamber, Greyfax heard the sounds of battle through the walls. She knew what was happening. She understood that Vecna had won. The Inquisition had consumed itself, just as he had predicted. Fear, paranoia, and suspicion, the tools they had used for millennia to fight the Imperium's enemies, had been turned against them, and she could do nothing to stop it. Have you ever realized the truth exactly when it was too late to matter? The aftermath of the Conclave was worse than the battle itself. Fortress Station Vigilance, which had been a symbol of inquisitorial strength and unity, was now a tomb. 37 Inquisitors dead, some from the firefight, others from executions that happened in the chaos, a few from accidents that were probably murders. The survivors, shell-shocked and traumatized, tried to make sense of what had happened. They couldn't, because the truth was too horrible to accept. They had been manipulated into destroying each other by an enemy they barely understood. In the holding cells beneath the ruined chamber, Greyfax sat on a cold metal bench, her hands still bound in suppression manacles that prevented her from using any equipment or weapons. She had been imprisoned to protect her during the investigation. Instead, the manacles had protected her from the massacre above. She was alive because she had been accused of being a traitor. The irony wasn't lost on her. A tech priest unlocked her cell, his mechanical face incapable of showing emotion. You are released, Inquisitor Lord Greyfax. High Inquisitor Cody Yaz's final order before his death was to free you if the Conclave failed. It has failed. Greyfax stepped out of the cell, her legs unsteady after days of confinement. Valdane, also freed. He awaits you in the command deck. She found Valdane standing before the main viewport, staring out at the void of space. He looked older than he had a week ago. They all did. The Conclave had aged them in ways that centuries of war never had. I was wrong, Greyfax said quietly, standing beside him. About Blackwood. About all of it. The evidence wasn't real. I should have questioned harder. Should have. We all should have. Valdane interrupted, his voice hollow. That's what makes it brilliant. Vecna didn't just fool one of us. He fooled all of us. He understood exactly what we would do when presented with evidence that matched our expectations. We saw what we were trained to see. Threats that needed to be eliminated. Can you forgive yourself for making the right decision with the wrong information? Greyfax looked at the bodies being removed from the main chamber through the viewport's reflection. What do we do now? The Inquisition is shattered. Even the survivors don't trust each other. How do we rebuild from this? Valdane was silent for a long moment. Then he said something that chilled Greyfax to her core. We don't. At least, not quickly. And while we're trying to rebuild, the Imperium is undefended against the threats we're supposed to fight. He pulled up a data slate showing reports from across the sector. The news was catastrophic. On the hive world of Tertius Gamma, a genestealer cult that had been under surveillance for months had launched a full uprising. The Inquisitor monitoring them had died in the Conclave. No replacement had been assigned. The cult now controlled 3 hive spires, and their psychic beacon had already summoned a Tyranid splinter fleet. The world would fall within weeks. On the shrine world of Sanctity's Light, a chaos cult had performed a ritual opening a minor warp rift. Normally, the local Inquisitor would have detected the psychic build-up days in advance. But that Inquisitor had been executed 3 weeks ago, accused of corruption based on evidence Vecna had planted. By the time anyone noticed the rift, demons were already pouring through. Billions of pilgrims were trapped on the planet with no way to evacuate. On the mining world of Kratos, an orc Wyak had gathered strength unopposed. The Ordo Xenos, Inquisitor responsible for that region, had fled into exile after being accused of Xenos collaboration. No one had taken over his duties. The orcs now had enough ships and warriors to threaten an entire subsector. The list went on, and on, and on. 17 major threats that should have been detected and neutralized were now full-blown crises. The Inquisition, the Imperium's early warning system against corruption and invasion, had been blinded and crippled. Have you ever watched everything you worked to protect fall apart because you were too busy fighting the wrong enemy? Emperor's Throne, Greyfax whispered, reading through the reports. This was his goal all along. Not just to destroy the Inquisition, but to leave the Imperium vulnerable. We've been so busy hunting each other that we forgot to hunt the real threats. And now those threats are killing millions, Valdane said bitterly. Billions before this is over. Greyfax felt rage building inside her. Not the hot, impulsive rage of youth, but the cold, focused anger of someone who had been played for a fool and knew it. We need to find him. Vecna, we need to end this. Ow! Valdane asked. He's a ghost. We don't know where he is. Don't know what he really wants. Don't even know if he's still in the sector or if he's moved on to cause chaos elsewhere. Greyfax's jaw tightened. Then we think like him. We've been reacting to his moves. It's time to anticipate them. He's been studying us, learning our methods, exploiting our weaknesses. So we study him, learn his methods, find his weaknesses. And if he doesn't have weaknesses, everyone has weaknesses. Greyfax replied with absolute certainty. Even entities like Vecna. We just have to find them. But finding Vecna's weaknesses would require doing something Greyfax had never done before. Thinking like a manipulator. Understanding how someone could orchestrate such elaborate deceptions. And worst of all, using methods that the Inquisition would consider dangerously close to heresy. Would you compromise your principles to catch an enemy who has no principles? Greyfax and Valdane spent the next 2 weeks coordinating with the surviving Inquisitors, trying to salvage what they could of the organization. It was like trying to rebuild a shattered mirror. You could put the pieces back together, but the cracks would always show. Most Inquisitors were too traumatized or too suspicious to cooperate fully. Some had retreated to their personal fortresses, refusing to work with anyone they didn't absolutely trust. Others had left the sector entirely, claiming they needed to reflect on what had happened. A few had requested transfer to other Ordos, no longer able to work with people who might have tried to kill them a week ago. The Inquisition, for all practical purposes, was no longer functional as a coordinated organization. But Greyfax refused to give up. She began her hunt for Vecna using methods she had learned over 2 centuries of tracking heretics and traitors. She analyzed every piece of false evidence, looking for patterns. She interviewed witnesses who had encountered Vecna or his illusions. She consulted with tech priests about methods for detecting magical manipulation. And slowly, painfully, she began to see the shape of his strategy. Vecna never used the same method twice. He varied his approach, keeping his victims off balance. But there was a pattern to the variation. He always targeted people who were influential, people whose deaths or discrediting would cause maximum chaos. He always planted evidence that was believable, but just slightly too perfect. And he always struck when his victims were most confident they understood the situation. He's teaching us, Greyfax realized one night, staring at her case files. Every manipulation, every death, it's a lesson. Valdane looked up from his own research. A lesson in what? In our own weaknesses, He's showing us that our certainty is arrogance, that our methods can be turned against us, that fear and paranoia are weapons that cut both ways. She paused. This isn't just an attack. It's almost like he's conducting an experiment. Can you imagine being someone's test subject without knowing it? That realization led Greyfax to a disturbing conclusion. Vecna probably wasn't done. The Conclave had been his masterpiece, yes, but it wasn't his endgame. Someone conducting an experiment doesn't stop after one successful trial. They continue testing, pushing variables, seeing how far they can go. Which meant Vecna was still out there, still planning, still manipulating. And Greyfax needed to find him before he struck again. She assembled a small team of Inquisitors she trusted, or at least trusted more than the others. Valdane, obviously. Inquisitor Amalia Corvus, a young but brilliant investigator who had survived the Conclave by staying out of the factional conflicts. And Inquisitor Darius Kane, a veteran of the Ordo Malleus who specialized in tracking entities that operated outside normal reality. We're going after Vecna. Greyfax told them in a secured briefing room aboard her personal ship. But we're not going to use standard inquisitorial methods. Those methods failed. They're what he expects. We need to think differently. How differently? Kane asked, his scarred face skeptical. Greyfax took a deep breath. What she was about to propose would have gotten her executed a month ago. We're going to use his own methods against him. Deception, manipulation, false information. We're going to make him think he's still winning while we close the trap around him. Valdane frowned. That's dangerous. We'd be operating exactly like the enemy we're hunting. How do we avoid becoming what we're fighting? We don't, Greyfax admitted. Or at least, we risk it. But the alternative is letting Vecna continue destroying the Imperium while we play by rules he's already learned to exploit. The room was silent as her team considered the implications. They were Inquisitors. They had absolute authority to use any means necessary to protect humanity. But there were still lines they weren't supposed to cross. Methods they weren't supposed to use. Compromises they weren't supposed to make. Would you cross the line between hunter and monster if it meant saving lives? Corvus spoke first. I'm in. We've already lost too many good people to hesitation and second-guessing. If thinking like Vecna is what it takes to stop him, so be it. Kane nodded slowly. The Emperor judges us by our results, not our methods. If we save the Imperium by becoming temporary monsters, he will forgive us. Or he won't. And we'll accept damnation as the price of victory. Valdane was the last to agree. I've spent 60 years hunting enemies of humanity using methods I trusted absolutely. Those methods failed. So yes, let's try something new. And so began the strangest investigation in inquisitorial history. A hunt where the hunters had to think like their prey, use as weapons, adopt as mindset. They started by doing exactly what Vecna had done. They planted false information. Greyfax created fabricated reports suggesting that the Inquisition had identified Vecna's hiding place and was preparing a massive assault. She made sure these reports were leaked through channels that Vecna had previously compromised. If he was still monitoring the Inquisition, and she was certain he would see the reports, and he would react. The trap was baited. Now, they just had to wait and see if Vecna would walk into it. But Greyfax had forgotten something crucial. Vecna had been manipulating people for thousands of years across multiple universes. He had survived gods, demons, and armies by always being 3 steps ahead. And he had absolutely anticipated that someone would eventually try to turn his methods against him. When the trap sprung, Greyfax discovered that she hadn't caught Vecna. She had caught a message from him, left in the exact spot where she thought she would ambush him. It was written in High Gothic on a piece of parchment that radiated faint necromantic energy. Inquisitor Greyfax, congratulations on learning to think like your enemy. It's progress of a sort, but you're still playing the game by my rules, on my board, with pieces I helped you arrange. If you truly want to find me, you'll need to do something I don't expect. Something that breaks the pattern. Something that makes no sense from a tactical perspective. Can you do that? Or will you continue following the logical path, doing what seems strategically sound, making this smart plays that I've already anticipated? I look forward to finding out. Your student in the art of manipulation, Vecna. Greyfax read the message 3 times, her hands shaking with rage and frustration. He had known. He had known exactly what she would do, predicted her clever plan, and left a message mocking her for it. Have you ever felt like the smartest person in the room, only to discover someone smarter was watching you the whole time? He's still ahead of us, Valdane said quietly, reading over her shoulder. Everything we do, he's already planned for it. Then we need to do something he can't plan for, Greyfax replied. Something irrational, something that makes no tactical sense. Like what? Greyfax looked at the message again, specifically at one phrase, something that makes no sense from a tactical perspective. And suddenly, she understood. Vecna expected her to be smart. He expected careful planning, logical deductions, strategic thinking. Everything an Inquisitor was trained to do. So she needed to stop thinking like an Inquisitor. We're not going to hunt him, Greyfax announced. We're going to invite him to a meeting. Her team stared at her like she'd lost her mind. Inquisitor, Kane said carefully, that's insane. Why would Vecna accept a meeting? Why would we want him to? Because he's curious, Greyfax replied, her mind racing through possibilities. His message proves it. He wants to see what we'll do next. He's treating this like an academic exercise, a test of whether we can surprise him. So let's surprise him. Let's offer him the one thing he can't get through manipulation or deception, which is a direct conversation with someone who understands what he's doing and isn't afraid to admit they've lost. It was a gamble, a massive, potentially suicidal gamble. But Greyfax had learned something from Vecna's manipulations. Sometimes the smart play was to do something stupid because your enemy wouldn't see it coming. She drafted a message and sent it through every astropathic channel in the sector, broadcasting openly rather than through encrypted communications. Vecna, you win. The Inquisition is broken. You've proven your point. We were arrogant, paranoid, and easily manipulated. You've taught us lessons we desperately needed to learn. Now I want to learn more. Meet me at coordinates attached, alone and unarmed, for a conversation. No tricks, no traps, no guards. Just 2 beings discussing philosophy and methodology. If you're truly confident in your victory, you'll accept. If you're afraid I might actually surprise you, you'll hide. Your choice, Greyfax. The message was sent. There was no going back now. Valdane looked at her with concern. If he comes, he could kill you instantly. Probably, Greyfax agreed. But if you wanted me dead, I'd already be dead. He's had dozens of opportunities to kill me. He hasn't, because I'm more useful to him alive, as someone who understands his work. And if he doesn't come, Greyfax smiled grimly. Then we'll know his greatest weakness. He's so confident in his superiority that he can't resist showing it off in person. All they could do now was wait, and hope that Vecna's curiosity was stronger than his caution. Have you ever met someone who terrified you? Not because of what they could do, but because of what they understood? The coordinates Greyfax had sent led to a dead world on the edge of the sector. A planet called Mortis Hollow that had been exterminated by the Inquisition 3 centuries ago after a demon incursion. Nothing lived there now. No vegetation, no animals, not even bacteria. Just gray, ash covering a lifeless landscape under a dark sky. It was the perfect place for a conversation that might end in death. Greyfax arrived alone, as promised. No retinue, no guards, no hidden backup teams. She had left specific instructions with Valdane. If she didn't return within 24 hours, assume she was dead and continue the hunt without her. He had argued, of course, but ultimately agreed. They both knew this was their best chance, possibly their only chance, to understand what they were really fighting. She stood in the ruins of what had once been a cathedral, now just broken walls and shattered statues. The wind howled through empty archways, carrying ash that stung her eyes. She had removed most of her armor, wearing only basic clothing and carrying no weapons except her faith. If Vecna wanted to kill her, armor wouldn't save her anyway. She waited for 3 hours, watching the gray horizon, wondering if he would come. And then he simply appeared, standing 20 meters away, as if he had always been there. No flash of light, no magical portal, no dramatic entrance. One moment the ruins were empty, the next they weren't. Vecna looked exactly as the reports had described. A skeletal lich, one hand nothing but bone, one eye glowing with red light. His robes seemed to be woven from shadows, moving in ways that had nothing to do with the wind. He radiated power, not the corrupting energy of chaos, but something older, something that predated the four gods. He studied Greyfax with his glowing eye, seeing through flesh and armor to the soul beneath. And then he smiled, a terrible expression on a skull-like face. "Inquisitor Lord Katarina Greyfax," Vecna said in his voice like grinding bones. "You actually came alone. I wasn't certain you would. The smart play would have been to set a trap, despite your promise. The fact that you didn't suggests either absolute honesty or absolute desperation. Which is it? Can you be both honest and desperate at the same time?" "Both," Greyfax replied, keeping her voice steady. "I'm desperate because my organization is broken and my sector is dying. And I'm honest because lying to you would be pointless. You'd see through it, wouldn't you?" "Almost certainly," Vecna agreed, walking closer. "I've spent thousands of years studying deception. I know every variation, every tactic. Honesty is actually more surprising to me than the most elaborate lie." He stopped a few meters away, close enough that Greyfax could see the fine details of his undead form. Ancient runes were carved into his bones, glowing faintly with necromantic power. His one intact, I was a preserved human organ kept alive through magic, while the socket that held the eye of Vecna blazed with supernatural sight. "You wanted a conversation," Vecna continued. "So let's converse. Ask your questions, Inquisitor. I'll answer truthfully, because at this point, why wouldn't I? I've already won." Greyfax took a deep breath. "Why? Why destroy the Inquisition? What do you gain from it?" Vecna's smile widened. "An excellent question. The answer is nothing. I gain nothing material from your organization's collapse. I don't want territory in this galaxy. I don't serve the Chaos Gods. I don't have some grand plan to conquer the Imperium." "Then why do it?" "Because I was curious," Vecna said simply. "In my home universe, I was a god. I had achieved ultimate power, ultimate knowledge. I had won every game worth playing. And then I discovered the multiverse. Infinite realities, infinite challenges. So I traveled here to Warhammer 40K, the grim darkness of the far future, and I wondered, could I thrive in a universe even darker than my own?" He gestured at the dead world around them. "This galaxy is fascinating. It's built on systems that consume themselves. The Imperium sacrifices psychers to keep the Emperor alive, who in turn protects humanity from chaos, which feeds on the suffering the Imperium causes. It's a perfect Ouroboros, a snake eating its own tail. I wanted to understand it. And the best way to understand a system is to break it. Have you ever destroyed something just to see how it worked?" "The Inquisition was the perfect test subject," Vecna continued, warming to his topic like a professor delivering a lecture. "You're an organization built entirely on paranoia and absolute certainty. You trust no one completely, yet you trust your methods absolutely. All I had to do was introduce doubt into your certainty, and you destroyed yourselves. By making us afraid," Greyfax said quietly. "Precisely." Vecna looked pleased, like a teacher whose student had understood the lesson. "Fear is the Imperium's foundation. Fear of aliens. Fear of heretics. Fear of mutation. Fear of chaos. Your entire civilization runs on fear, using it as a tool to maintain order and loyalty. But fear is a terrible foundation to build on, because it can always be redirected." He moved closer, his voice becoming almost gentle. "I didn't corrupt your Inquisitors, Greyfax. I didn't need to. They were already afraid. Afraid of failure. Afraid of corruption. Afraid of missing a threat and letting billions die. All I did was give them something specific to fear. Each other. And once that fear took root, they did the rest themselves. We killed innocent people," Greyfax said, her voice breaking slightly. "Good servants of the Emperor. My friend Blackwood, who never betrayed anyone. All those Inquisitors at the Conclave. They died because we We're too afraid to question our own conclusions. Yes, Vecna agreed, no judgment in his voice. You did, and that's the lesson I wanted to teach. Fear makes you powerful against external enemies. But internal enemies? Enemies who understand fear and know how to weaponize it? Against them, fear makes you weak. It makes you see threats that don't exist and ignore truths that contradict your expectations. Would you accept a lesson if it cost you everything you cared about? Greyfax felt tears on her face, the first time she had cried in over a century. What do you want from me, Vecna? Why agree to meet? You've won. You could just leave, move on to your next experiment in some other galaxy. I could, Vecna admitted, but I'm curious about what you'll do next. You've learned the lesson I taught. You understand that your methods can be turned against you. So what will you do with that knowledge? Will you try to rebuild the Inquisition using the same broken foundation? Or will you do something different? He leaned closer, his glowing eye fixed on her soul. Will you let fear continue to rule you? Or will you find a new way to protect your Imperium? It was Greyfax realized a genuine question. Vecna actually wanted to know. He had broken the Inquisition to see what would emerge from the ruins. The deaths, the suffering, the catastrophes. They were all just variables in his experiment. And now he was waiting to see the results. The rage that had been building in Greyfax suddenly crystallized into absolute clarity. She understood now. Understood what Vecna was, what he wanted, what would hurt him most. You want to know what I'll do? Greyfax asked, her voice steady again. I'll tell you. But first, let me ask you a question. In all your thousands of years of existence, in all the universes you've visited, have you ever actually created anything? Vecna's smile faltered slightly. What? You manipulate. You scheme. You tear down systems to see how they work. But have you ever built something? Have you ever created an organization, a society, a culture that was better than what existed before? Or do you just travel from universe to universe, breaking things and calling it understanding? Can you claim to understand something if all you've ever done is destroy it? For the first time since arriving, Vecna looked uncomfortable. I understand the fundamental nature of power of... You understand nothing, Greyfax interrupted, her voice filled with absolute conviction. You know how to break things. That's not wisdom. That's vandalism. A child can break a toy to see how it works. It takes an adult to build something that lasts. She stepped forward, closing the distance between them. You think you've won because you destroyed the Inquisition, but you haven't won anything, because I'm going to rebuild it. And when I do, it will be stronger than before. Not because of fear, but because of what you taught us. That certainty without humility is arrogance. That trust without verification is foolishness. That power without accountability is tyranny. Vecna's eye blazed brighter. You think you can rebuild? After everything that's happened? Your fellow Inquisitors will never trust each other again. You're right, Greyfax agreed. They won't. Not the way they did before. But that's actually better. We'll build new systems. Checks and balances. Multiple independent verifications of evidence. Mandatory consultation before executions. All the things we should have had before you exposed our weaknesses. She smiled. Not a happy smile, but a determined one. You wanted to teach us a lesson, Vecna. Congratulations. We learned it. We learned that our old ways were broken. And now we're going to build something new from the ruins you created. Have you ever tried to hurt someone only to make them stronger? Vecna stared at her, his ancient mind processing this unexpected response. He had anticipated many reactions. Anger, despair, attempts at vengeance, maybe even suicide. What he hadn't anticipated was gratitude. Twisted, painful gratitude, but gratitude nonetheless. You're thanking me, he said slowly, disbelief in his voice. For destroying your organization and getting thousands killed. You're actually thanking me. I'm not thanking you, Greyfax corrected. I'm acknowledging that you've made us better by showing us our worst flaws. That doesn't excuse what you did. It doesn't make the deaths acceptable, but it means they won't be meaningless. Every Inquisitor who died because of your manipulations will be remembered as a lesson in what happens when we let fear overcome wisdom. She paused, then said the words that would define everything that came after. And you'll be forgotten. Because that's what happens to teachers who only know how to destroy. They're footnotes in the story of people who learned from them and did better. Vecna's entire demeanor changed. The amused superiority vanished, replaced by something darker. You think you've won this conversation? You think words can undo what I've accomplished? I think, Greyfax said carefully, that you came here expecting to gloat over a broken enemy. Instead, you found someone who understands exactly what you are, a brilliant, ancient, fundamentally empty being who measures success by how much chaos you can cause. You're a master of destruction with nothing to show for it except ruins. And that terrifies you more than any demon or god ever could. Can you defeat an enemy not with weapons, but by refusing to be the victim they expected? For a long moment, Vecna said nothing. His glowing, I studied Greyfax with an intensity that would have broken lesser minds. He could kill her, easily, a single spell, and she would cease to exist. But that would prove her point. It would mean she had gotten to him, made him react emotionally instead of intellectually. And Vecna, for all his power, still had pride. Finally, he laughed. It was a hollow sound like wind through a crypt, but it was genuine. You're either the bravest human I've ever met or the most foolish. Possibly both. Very well, Inquisitor. Rebuild your organization. Create your new systems. Try to make the Imperium better. He turned to leave, then paused. But remember this. The Imperium is built on foundations of fear, suffering, and endless war. You can change the Inquisition, but you cannot change that. Eventually, the darkness of this universe will consume your reforms. It always does. There are no happy endings in Warhammer 40k. Only brief delays before the inevitable. Maybe, Greyfax agreed. But we'll fight anyway. Because that's what we do. We fight hopeless battles against impossible odds, knowing we'll probably lose, because the alternative is giving up. And we don't give up. Ever. Vecna nodded slowly, something like respect flickering in his eye. Then I'll leave you to your hopeless battle, Inquisitor. Perhaps I'll return in a few centuries to see if you succeeded or if the darkness consumed you. Either way, it should be educational. Will you keep manipulating us? Greyfax asked. Keep planting false evidence and turning us against each other. Vecna considered the question. No, the experiment is complete. I've learned what I wanted to learn about how your organization operates. Continuing would just be repeating the same test, and that's boring. He paused. Besides, you'll be watching for my methods now. The same tricks won't work twice. One more question, Greyfax said as he began to fade from view. Was any of it real? The evidence against Blackwood, the corruption you claim to find, was any of it actually genuine? Would you want to know if your friend died for a complete lie, or if there was even a grain of truth? Vecna's form was almost transparent now, fading into the shadows between dimensions. But his voice carried clearly. That's the beauty of the best lies, Inquisitor. They always contain enough truth that you can never be completely certain what was real and what was fabricated. Blackwood was innocent. But was he perfectly innocent? Did he never have a single doubt, a single moment of weakness? You'll never know. And that uncertainty will haunt you for the rest of your life. And then he was gone, vanished as completely as if he had never existed. Greyfax stood alone in the ruins, processing everything that had happened. Vecna was right. She would never know the complete truth. But she had learned something more important. Truth mattered less than what you did with uncertainty. The old Inquisition had demanded absolute certainty and punished any doubt. The new Inquisition would have to embrace uncertainty while still maintaining vigilance. It would be harder, more complicated, more painful, but it would be better. Can you build something better on the ruins of what failed? Greyfax returned to her ship and immediately began drafting new protocols for the Inquisition. She knew it would take years, maybe decades, to implement them. Many Inquisitors would resist. Change was always hard, especially for an organization as old and traditional as the Inquisition. But she had allies now. Valdane, who had learned the same lessons. Corvus, who represented the younger generation willing to try new approaches. Kane, who understood that even ancient enemies could teach valuable lessons. Together, They began the slow, painful process of rebuilding. They created the protocol of multiple verification. No Inquisitor could be executed based on evidence provided by a single source. At least 3 independent investigations had to confirm corruption before lethal action was authorized. They established the Conclave of Review, a rotating council of inquisitors who would examine questionable executions and accusations, providing oversight without centralizing power. They implemented the right of doubt, a formal process where inquisitors could question their own conclusions without being suspected of weakness or corruption. Doubt became not a sign of failure, but a sign of wisdom. And most controversially, they created the Mercy Clause. In cases where evidence was ambiguous, exile was preferred over execution. Better to remove a potentially corrupted inquisitor from power than to risk killing an innocent servant of the emperor. The reforms were revolutionary. They were also incomplete, imperfect, and would require constant refinement. But they were a start. Have you ever tried to fix a broken system while it was still operating? 6 months after the meeting on Mortis Hollow, Greyfax received an encrypted message. The origin point was impossible to trace, but she knew who it was from. Inquisitor Greyfax, I've been watching your reforms with interest. They are adequate. You've addressed some of the vulnerabilities I exploited, though not all of them. You're learning. Slowly. A word of advice. Your new systems assume that all manipulators operate like I do, through evidence and psychological warfare. But the universe is vast, and other enemies will use different methods. Don't become so focused on preventing my specific attacks that you blind yourself to other threats. Also, you should know, there's a Genestealer cult on Ophelia 7, growing in the Underhive beneath your fortress. They've been there for 2 years. Your reformed Inquisition hasn't detected them yet. Just thought you'd want to know. This one's a gift. The next threat, you'll have to find yourself. Still watching Vecna. P.S. The cult really exists. This isn't a manipulation. I have nothing to gain from lying about it now. You'll find them in Hablock Epsilon 7, level -40. But I suppose you'll waste time verifying this message's authenticity first. Old habits die hard, don't they? Greyfax immediately ordered an investigation of Hablock Epsilon 7. 3 days later, her forces uncovered a Genestealer cult exactly where Vecna had said it would be. The cult was eliminated before it could signal the Hive fleet. Vecna had been telling the truth. He had given her actionable intelligence with no apparent benefit to himself, which meant he was still playing a game Greyfax didn't fully understand. But that was okay. She didn't need to understand every move to play effectively. She just needed to keep learning, keep adapting, keep building something better than what had come before. Can you win a game when you don't even know all the rules? Years passed. The Inquisition slowly rebuilt, not to its former strength, but to something different. More careful, more humble, more aware of its own fallibility. The reforms weren't perfect. Mistakes were still made. Innocent people still died. But the frequency decreased. The methods improved. The organization learned. And across the sector, the threats that had grown unchecked during the chaos were gradually brought back under control. Slowly, painfully, but successfully, Greyfax never saw Vecna again. She didn't know if he had left the galaxy, moved on to other experiments in other universes, or was simply watching from the shadows, waiting to see what she would do next. It didn't matter. She had work to do, because in the grim darkness of the far future, there was always work to do, always enemies to fight, always systems to improve, always hope to maintain against impossible odds. Fear was the Imperium's weakness, but determination? Determination was its strength. And Greyfax was determined to prove that even in the darkest universe imaginable, even when manipulated by ancient liches and consumed by paranoia, humanity could learn from its mistakes and become better. Not perfect, never perfect, but better. And sometimes, in a galaxy where there was only war, better was the closest thing to victory you could achieve. In a dimension beyond normal space, in a library that existed outside time, Vecna added a new entry to his collection of observations. Universe, Warhammer 40K experiment. Weaponization of institutional paranoia result. Success qualified. The Inquisition destroyed itself as predicted. However, unexpected outcome. Survivors learned from manipulation and implemented countermeasures. Subject Greyfax demonstrated remarkable resilience and adaptability. Conclusion. The grim darkness of the far future is indeed darker than my home universe, but also more resilient. Systems built on suffering can survive almost anything because they're already adapted to worst-case scenarios. Recommendation. Do not underestimate humanity's capacity to learn from catastrophe. They may be paranoid, brutal, and fanatical, but they're also survivors. Note to self. Find a different universe to experiment on next time. This one is exhausting. Vecna closed the book and smiled. He had learned something after all. And in the end, wasn't that what made the experiment worthwhile?